What's going on, guys? Rounded TikTak here, and welcome back to my second ever Destiny 2 video. Now, before we jump into the video, I just want to mention that 90% of Destiny 2's sandbox is pretty easy. Once you get to light cap and you know how to play the game and know what you're doing, there's nothing in the game except for a very few activities that are relatively difficult. And this build is not something you're going to be bringing into those super hard difficulties. However, I did bring it into a Legend Lost sector and it performed fine. And I brought it into the legendary campaign where you are capped at whatever light level it does cap you at. And both of those things, this build did absolutely fine and actually did pretty damn good in the legendary story, at least. But for the other 90% of the sandbox within Destiny 2, which is just mob clearing and having fun, especially the new PsyOps mission, stuff like that with a ton of enemies, I don't think I've had more fun in Destiny 2 ever than running around with this build. So without further ado, let's jump into the video. This is the Ruinous Effigy Volatile Rounds Font of Might build. Man, that is a mouthful. Now, although there are a ton of weapons that you could use with the new Volatile Rounds perk and Font of Might and things like that and the well builds, this one is hands down the most fun I've ever had on a Destiny 2 character in the game. Something about taking a giant orb and dunking it onto your enemies really has no rival. I can't believe how much fun the gameplay loop of me killing something, picking up an orb, and smashing it into the skull of my enemies is just how much fun it really is. So let's jump into the build and talk about why this build works so well. So where does the build start off? Well, that is at the Ruinous Effigy. While everybody's running around using their funnel webs at Subsistence and Frenzy, and maybe you haven't gotten that lucky to grab one, grab this instead. You can get it from the wall right now, just as soon as you talk to Zur and get a cipher, whatever. The Ruinous Effigy has always been known as a meme weapon, and by no stretch of the word are we in a trace rifle meta. I don't know if there ever was one, as I'm kind of new to the Destiny 2 content creator scene, but I'm telling you, hands down, this is the most fun I've had in Destiny 2 since I started playing again. The Ruinous Effigy, what it does is after you kill an enemy, it spawns an orb. This orb can be used to do two things. One is grab it and dunk like you're Michael Jordan on top of your enemies' heads and skull crush them into the ground, which is the fun part. Or you can hold guard while holding the ball. An orb comes around you. It takes a little bit of your life, but any enemy that walks in there becomes blinded and takes damage. Both of these things are really fun to do on Warlock and Hunter. And as we get into the build, you'll see why. It basically turns you into an unkillable mini nuke at any point in the game. I'm talking this thing kills yellow bars and red bars and bosses and unstoppables and everything else in the game almost instantly. The AoE on the orb explosion is absurdly large. I would probably say close to 2 rockets in size, and absolutely crushes all 90% of the content in the game. And regardless of how well it performs regularly, the goddamn build is so fun to use. I'm telling you, you gotta try it out. So that's the main weapon we're going to be using. Your primary doesn't matter too much, and I would probably suggest using a Void heavy weapon to take advantage of the Volatile Rounds perk if you need to reload or switch, or this thing doesn't kill it instantly, or you're doing somewhat harder content. That's the Ruinous Effigy. Let's go into the build and mods we're currently using to make this work so well. Voidwalker 3.0 was just released, and with it came a ton of new perks, aspects, and fragments that really help benefit this build. We become an absolute AoE monster with this build and what we have available to use. It's absolutely disgusting. So we're going to be using vortex grenades. I feel like these are the best in 90% of the game. Sometimes I really like Axion bolt grenades. It's more of a set it, forget it kind of thing. And vortex grenades, sometimes you throw it, kill the enemies, and then other enemies spawn elsewhere, and it feels a bit of a waste. But it's not too bad because we're going to be spawning so many wells that we get our grenades back right away anyway. For the aspects here, we have Feed the Void. Defeat a target with a void ability, activates Devour. This is important because while we're running around with the orb, our grenade that we throw previously will keep us alive while we're getting into close range while grabbing the Ruinous Effigy orb. This is important to note. And then we're going to be using Chaos Accelerant. Press Q to overcharge your grenades. They become stronger. The Vortex Grenade pulls in enemies, allowing for the Ruinous Effigy ball to kind of kill everything because they're all stacked up on top of each other. You could use Child of the Old Gods. You could use this. There's no problem with it. If you don't want to overcharge your grenades, that's perfectly fine too. Now for the fragments we're using, we only get to choose 3 because of the aspects we're running. We are going to be using Echo of Explosion, just more void AoE nonsense. This thing is disgusting on every character that I've played it on. No matter what you're doing, this thing just crushes all content. Everything blows up, everything dies, and we're just going to be running with that and just blowing up everything else with the Ruinous Effigy. Then we're going to use Echo of Remnants, and this is just so your vortex grenade does last longer and it has an increased duration. Lastly, we're using Echo of Undermining. Your void grenades weaken targets. This is important to note because now our Ruinous Effigy ball that we throw does, are you ready for this? 103,000 damage per explosion. That is pretty close to rocket damage. You basically have a free mini nuke in your pocket at all times, killing anything that comes your way. You throw your grenade, possibly overcharge, kill something with the trace rifle, grab the orb, and blow it up. It is so much fun to do, and the play cycle is just so well tuned, and it's fantastic. I really recommend you trying this out. That is the aspect, that is the weapon. Let's talk about the mods that we are currently using. There is one caveat here that I'm not 100% sure about, and we'll talk about it when we get there, as I've played with both kind of builds and I'm not sure which one is the best. For here, we're going to be using a trace rifle ammo finder on our helmet. We're going to be using Ashes to Assets, and we're going to be using Font of Might. Font of Might gives you extra damage when you pick up an orb, in this case a void orb. Now our Ruinous Effigy trace beam really starts ramping up its damage, and with its rate of fire being 1,000, it really starts to shred. Next, we're going to be using Grenade Kickstart. This is important because we want our grenades up at all times. And then over here, we're going to be using Elemental Time Dilation. Elemental mods that grant you time limited benefits can now stack, increasing the duration of the effect for each copy of the mod you have equipped. This just allows us to keep our Font of Might and our volatile rounds up at all times. You're going to be dropping so many wells that this is constantly going to be up. The other perks you can just use for what kind of content you may need. Next, we're going to be talking about the boots, and here we have Absolution, Installation, and Volatile Flow. Volatile Flow is the key part to this build. Of course, picking up a Void Elemental Well grants you Void Weapons volatile rounds. So, now, your Trace Rifle, which does insane single target damage to lower bar enemies. You're not going to use it on bosses or anything, but even then, it does pretty well there too. Now has this. And the benefit to this is every like 3 shots from your Trace Rifle procs this and hits for around 7,000 damage. Since the rate of fire is so high on the Ruinous Effigy, this thing really begins to shine. You're going to be blowing up the entire world. Next, we're going to talk about our bond, and this is the one caveat I'm not 100% sure about. I've been running Bountiful Wells here, and I kind of like that a lot, but I also didn't want to be out of ways to make wells when my grenade missed or it didn't get the last hit on the enemy. So I'm also testing out elemental armaments since we're using the Ruinous Effigy constantly, and that's Void, and we're running Void. It does spawn wells, and when you're in a pinch, it is very helpful. But if you have the perfect gameplay loop going, I would probably keep 2 bountiful wells, or possibly, if you can fit it, explosive well maker, although that's going to spawn you a solar orb. I'm not sure about that. I haven't tested it that far, but this is currently what I'm using. The next thing we're going to be using is overload grenades. This allows you to free up a slot in your primary or heavy or wherever. Considering we're using a trace rifle, it's kind of hard to hit the 1 or 2 champion mons that you need. This is very, very helpful. And lastly, devouring depths here. When casting your Void super while you are critically wounded or benefiting from Devour, increase your damage with that super. This does a ton of extra damage, and Devour is constantly on. Constantly. So that you're basically always getting this benefit. And if you don't need to use these or this when you're just doing some easier content, Bomber is another great pick. Lastly, to top this build off, we're going to be using the Mantle of Battle Harmony. Now, this is an amazing exotic. I really do enjoy using this, and this is why. Takedowns with weapons that have the damage type matching your subclass element grant you super energy. That's fantastic because our super hits really hard with the Devour perk that we just talked about. While your super energy is full, you instead gain a temporary bonus to weapon damage of the type matching your subclass. So this ends up really, really shredding enemies. Like, to the degree I can't even imagine. I'm not 100% sure if the Ruinous Effigy ball works with this perk. Not 100% sure. It's possible. That's why I've probably been hitting for 103,000 damage, and that's why it probably turns it into a mini nuke. Regardless, the trace rifle damage tends to basically triple with Font of Might and this, allowing you to absolutely decimate everything. Here we're using Elemental Ordnance, and this is just to spawn us some more wells with our grenades constantly being up. If you do not have the Mantle of Battle Harmony, I would probably suggest using Controverse Hold for even stronger grenades, or possibly Nezarec Sin to just keep your abilities going as much as possible. All 3 of these exotics work really well. They're all void based, and I'm telling you, you guys have to try this build. You can see it in the gameplay. The gameplay loop that it provides is probably some of the funnest stuff I've done in Destiny 2. Try it out. Let me know what you think. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If I can do it any different or you have any suggestions, let me know down in the comments below. Again, I'm just getting into the Destiny scene. I try to make clean, concise videos with a little bit of fun thrown in. Thank you so much. I will talk to you guys next time. TikTak out.